You know, people often ask me about backgrounds. Steve, what should I do? How do I do them? What should I think about? Backgrounds can be literally anything. But the best rule of thumb is simpler is better than more complex, especially if you're focusing on one main subject, like in a figurative piece, or a floral, or a still life, or even something close up in a landscape. Well, today we are going to look at a technique I often use for integrating that background with the foreground subject. It takes a little bit of thinking when you're setting it up, but it's very effective, so I hope you'll follow along. Well, hello, minders and watercolorists from across the globe. How's everybody doing out there? Well, I've been wanting to do another figurative painting for quite a while. However, I hasten to say, I hope if you paint anything, you'll hang on and watch, because I'll provide a lot of tips that don't just have to do with figures and portraits and people. You know, for some reason on YouTube, or at least with my channel, portraits and figurative painting just doesn't seem to be real popular. I think it's because there are a lot of beginners looking for tips and processes, and landscape is just probably more popular. I don't know. If you shy away from figurative painting and drawing and portraiture, put a comment down below and let me know why. I'd be curious. I would do a lot more of this because I love it just as much as I love painting landscape. Anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk about. So not too long ago, I did this piece here that you see. This was sort of a line and wash using Inktense. It was an experiment. I thought it worked out pretty well. And the idea was to use Inktense for the line and pulling tone out of the line sort of as an underpainting. It was a technique I thought worked really well. I was really pleased with it. Wanted to try it again. This is going to be less of a line and wash. Now the line is there. You'll see it as I do this underdrawing and underpainting. But as I paint this, more and more of that line will sort of disappear into the values. Nevertheless, I thought it was a neat technique for just kind of establishing those areas, those lines, those values, those forms that could be seen underneath the washes. Sometimes when you draw out a scene or draw out something that you're going to paint, the line gets lost. The form gets lost. In landscape, that's usually okay. But that's what I'm doing here. And the process is, again, it's just drawing using Inktense. If you don't know what Inktense is, I'll link to that episode where I used Inktense. It's like a watercolor pencil. And once it's activated, it turns to ink, dries more permanently. Sometimes it can still be re-wet a little bit. That's one of the things I discovered, but not nearly as much as regular watercolor or watercolor pencil. The key is activating it well enough so that line and the tone that you pull out of that line, you know, really sinks into the paper and becomes indelible. And that's what I'm doing here. So drawing the subject out in detail, inking it or lining it with Inktense pencils, pulling value and shading out of the line with water activating it. And that gives me a nice underpainting or underdrawing. And here I'm actually starting to paint with regular watercolor on top of that painting. I wanted to see how it would do. And before I did anything in the background, I wanted to see how these flesh tones and how it would work with that. See how the process was going to come through. And it's coming through great. So yeah, we'll just proceed with the watercoloring and the flesh tones. And hopefully you can see what I'm talking about. Can still see the line, but as I paint over it, it just sort of blends in with the paint. Now, the main subject I want to talk about here, and this is what is so transferable to any kind of painting, landscape, florals, portraits, you name it, is connections. Connecting washes in neat ways. It just sort of integrates and unifies your whole painting. So what I wanted to do in this piece, I wanted to really pay special attention to taking values and colors from the figure into the background and integrating that. And these have some really strong dynamic shadows. That's one of the things that really attracted me to this photograph. This is a photograph that I took. This woman is a historical reenactor, 18th century reenactor, right, in a sort of a Revolutionary War period encampment. It's one that we go to very frequently over the years. And I got a photo I felt that just really had some neat shadows and light. But the main focus here, the main goal I had was I really wanted to have a very loose, washy background and integrate that into the figure, who was going to be a lot tighter, a lot more realistic and detailed. I love that. I love being able to meld the two types of styles, the looseness and the tightness, and getting those washes, those background washes, to just sort of invade the main subject. It's something that's done a lot more actually with landscape. A lot of landscape painters will do this. When I get into these portraits or figurative pieces, I like to keep the backgrounds more nebulous. So I'm thinking about how to make them loose and yet integrate with the piece. So hopefully I'm not over talking this subject. So you saw the first one here. I'm doing sort of the bluish parts of her outer frock, if you will, and melding that into the background. And it's not necessarily a quick, splashy process. Sometimes I spend a lot of time thinking about what to pre-wet, and I did pre-wet these areas. She's wearing like a inner, I don't know what you call these costumes from that century, but sort of an inner dress, and then this is like an outer overcoat, something. Whatever, but there you can see it's dry now. That blue part I was just doing. You can go back in. I went back in and starting to add shading to it. So you can still separate the values of the figure and some of the shading from the background. What it does do is it gives you more opportunity to get these lost and found edges. Another thing I love to do. There was a lot of sort of a reddish color on the ground. We have a lot of red clay around here in South Carolina, and that was reflecting light back up into the shadow part of her dress. It's just a very interesting light on the subject, and I really, really wanted to capture that. Hopefully you can see now how that underdrawing really helped, but at the same time it didn't overpower and turn this into a line and wash. Not that a line and wash would have been bad, but this style I was going for was not a line and wash style. But the line really helps. That's what I'm saying. Gives me my outlines, my areas to paint and add value. From this point on, you're just going to see a lot more shading and shadow adjustment. You're going to see the areas of value, the washes, the details get smaller and smaller. And you're going to see me punch up those values and push the shadows till I have something dark and dynamic. This is probably one of the most enjoyable parts, is the details. Now here I've got more blue to do in the shadows on her dress. So again, I wanted to integrate that with the background. And you'll notice on the last one, the last section I did this with, I turned it upside down. That's just simply to get it to flow towards the top of the painting. Get the nice soft streak. So the part that I'm painting there on her dress is pre-wet along with areas of the background. So they all just blend together. That's a pretty effective technique. And as it dries, as it starts to dry and move less, I'm just dabbing in darker pigment. Now turn it around and just let it dry. Going to do the same thing on the other side. All part of that darker sort of overcoat that she's wearing. I know overcoat's not the correct term, so maybe one of you fashion historians out there can tell me what it is. Now we're just going to build those shadows again. It's a process going from section of the figure to section of the figure. Dynamic shadows and bold, deep values just really excite me when they're done well, and that's what I strive to do in this piece. There's a lot of points at which I could have just moved on and let it be, but I tend to just try to think, how can I push it a little further, and should I push it a little further? She was casting a real strong shadow along the ground, so needed to make sure I get that in there. Just kind of grounds her, anchors her. She was poking into a campfire, and I didn't really want to get too involved with the campfire. As a matter of fact, the finished piece, when you'll see I'll probably mat in or crop in fairly tight. And I wanted to keep the campfire loose also. All the focus I wanted to be mainly on her. So we're just going to add a little bit of this green to the background. Again, I've pre-wet an area with clear water, and now I'm dabbing in some green. Mostly Hooker's green, yellowed up a little bit with some yellow ochre. I am mostly using my 6-color set, although I have those 6 colors in a larger set here of several other colors. I think it's like 18 colors, but I'm still mainly using the 6 that is in my Mary Blue set. They were perfect for this piece. The indigo, as you can see on the dress and the outer garment there, is about the right color. I think I might have employed a little bit of purple. I used a lot of the dragon's blood in the ground, sort of reddened it up a little bit with the quinacridone lake. We're going into the details now, and again, pushing those shadow values down, getting lots of nice contrast. I really have to watch myself too sometimes on these complicated folds with complicated shadows can tend to have me overworking things a bit. So, there's a lot of just take a stroke, sit back, look at it. What I'm using right here is called an eradicator brush. There is no link for this on Amazon, so you won't find it below. It comes from Rosemary and Company brushes. It's like a scrubber, but not quite as stiff and aggressive as a scrubber. But it's a nice, and it looks like I'm really scrubbing hard. I'm not. It's a nice softener and allows me to pick up. So here's some gouache. And this is about the only way I'll be using gouache here. I did sprinkle some down in on the ground beneath her, but this is just to clean up some of that highlight in the sleeve. Perfectly acceptable way to use gouache, and I build it in layers. I don't use thick gouache. I may go over these areas several times, and it sinks into the paper, and just I try to blend it in with the paper so it's not a real obvious layer of gouache. Much as possible, I do try to keep the highlights transparent and white of the paper, but I just really felt like I wanted to clean up some edges here, and I really didn't do it anywhere else. I didn't need to. But I was unhappy with the way some of the highlights, the shapes that some of the highlights were creating, and I just felt like I needed to recapture a lot of that, smooth it out, and establish a better edge. That's all I'm doing. And I was glad that I did it. I was able to bring some thin veins of highlight too down into the shadow area, which it needed. And we're getting close to being done. I hope you'll try some of these techniques, mainly integrating subject matter, foreground subject matter with the background. washes. And then going in and delineating them more with shadow and contrast. Just trying to get that unity or that unification of value and color. Alright, thanks everyone. I appreciate you watching. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope there were some useful tips here that you can use for any kind of painting, not just for figurative. Thank you so much, patrons, for your support of this channel. And it's very, very important to me. And we will see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.